I used the word courage before on purpose. I don't want to oversell myself. Like it took a while for me to find the courage to make additional investments, but I went from, grossing 300,000 a year and having most of the work be on me to grossing $1.3 million a year and having a team of eight.
Welcome back to another episode of Right on the Money, the podcast dedicated to inspiring business owners to overcome their obstacles, grow their business, and lead greatly. I'm your host, Janae K. Wright, and along with my co-host, Deshaun White, I'm thrilled to have you join us for another insightful episode. Today, we have a special guest who's an expert in dynamic leadership and organization development, Mr. Glenn E. Martin. Glenn's extensive experience makes him the perfect guy to help you understand how to implement effective systems and structures to optimize productivity, unleash your full potential as a leader, and balance the demands of entrepreneurship while prioritizing your health and well-being.
Glenn E. Martin is a formerly incarcerated advocate and entrepreneur who founded and leads Gem Real Estates and Gem Trainers, a real estate company that rents primarily to formerly incarcerated tenants, and a successful nonprofit consultancy, respectively. Glenn also founded Just Leadership USA, dedicated to cutting the U.S. correctional population in half by 2030. His leadership has been recognized with multiple honors, including the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Award. He is a founding member of the Council on Criminal Justice. Glenn was also the senior vice president of the Fortune Society, where he founded and led the David Rothenberg Center for Public Policy. He also served as co-director at the Legal Action Center and co-founded the Education from the Inside Out Coalition. He is also the founder of the hashtag Close Rikers campaign. You can connect with him at Glenn E. Martin on Twitter.
One of the ways that people describe themselves as business leaders, right, is dynamic. And I've always wondered what that actually meant, right? And I actually looked it up this time, and it talks about, the versatility, the agility, the ability to just make changes on when needed, right? And in the last 3 years, I think that experience is so necessary for what we're going through, right? From the small business owners who are dealing with COVID to the organizations who survive COVID now have to deal with recession and have to deal with trying to find employees who are just hopping jobs like crazy. All these are part of a skill that helps people who are considered dynamic leaders overcome, right? So today I'm happy to talk to Glenn about this because Glenn, that's like his hashtag. It's part of his name. When you talk to anybody who knows Glenn, it's, oh my God, he's so dynamic. He helps me understand these issues of my company in a different way. So I want to let's jump right in and have this conversation with Glenn about, when people say that Glenn Martin is a dynamic leader, what does that mean to you?
Well, first of all, thanks for that generous introduction from both of you. I hear the word dynamic associated with my leadership, and I think part of it is my skill set has always been someone who is a problem solver. I'm someone who's hyper aware of the things that are going on around me, and as people are still realizing that they're in the middle of a crisis, I'm usually already analyzing it and coming up with solutions. So I think part of what makes me unique from some of the other leaders that I have met during my journey is just taking the skills that I have had generally as a human being, as a person, and figuring out how to build a business that allows me to maximize those skills and allows me to use those skills to usually create something from nothing, to go from concept to brick and mortar. And I find that you have to not just be dynamic, but really be ahead of the challenges that are on the horizon. And in some ways, leaders live in conflict. If you don't wake up in the morning and experience conflict, you're probably not leading. And I anticipate that from the minute I put my feet on the floor.
It's hard. There's so much information coming at you all the time. How do you decipher what's important, what's not? How do you keep your focus on what's the straight line?
That's a really good question. That reminds me of one of the things I do to be a very organized person. I actually utilize my inbox as a way to keep me focused on whether or not I'm achieving the challenges of the day, the challenges of the week, the challenges of the month. I go through my inbox. I first sort out the email that's, either spam or advertising or marketing. Then I put aside the very lengthy emails. I find that those are challenging to deal with in the middle of a busy day. And then I identify the emails that I need to respond to quickly to keep the ball moving forward. What I do is I source talent that can really fill the gaps in my experience. So I hire my weakness, if you will. And what I'm trying to do is maximize that investment. So the quicker I can get a challenge over to a person who may be more skilled than I am to be able to address that challenge, frankly, the less it'll cost me and the more I'm maximizing that investment. And what I do is I reduce my inbox as the day goes along. So if I end the day, sort through 150 emails, end with 3 or 4, that's a good day. If my inbox ends with 40 or 50 emails, I knew that that was a very challenging day.
But someone who does as much as you do, right? With gem trainers and with gem real estate, how do you organize so many parts, right, in a really effective way that allows you to really stay on top of goals?
I'm a systems person. I take chaos and build systems around it. And if I don't know how to build systems, I bring in people who help me to build systems. I have the benefit of being a visionary, but also being a person who has built things that have dynamic systems involved that allow people to get their work done in ways that are most efficient. I feel as though if you build an institution and you walk away from it and it doesn't continue to exist, you haven't built anything. So I'm constantly trying to figure out not just how we present ourselves to the world and what the brand is, but how do we build enough of a skeleton that if I am unavailable, that thing continues to operate?
No, I like that. I think that that's a really good point, right? It's the goal of every entrepreneur is to build something that outlasts them. So to have the ability to build those kind of systems in place, there's a someone I was talking to a couple weeks ago, and the idea that in the last 10 years they've had a week vacation, like there's a problem in the systems you've created, right? Because there's too reliant on you to operate. So that doesn't give you the kind of leeway that needs to really grow your business and get to that level.
Yeah, that's a good point. I always try to bring as much humility to the table as possible because people look at me and the fact that I'm running two businesses and they're just amazed at my ability to do that. I've evolved. Like, hearing you talking about taking vacation and wellness and those sort of things, that wasn't me years ago. In fact, I think I think my most tweeted statement is sleep is for the weak when I first started. And now I'm quite the opposite. I work out 4 days a week. I do yoga 1 day a week. Some days I
Yeah.
shut down at 2 o'clock and go hiking. I literally build those things into my schedule because I actually find that that is part of being an effective entrepreneur. Self care, in turn, means that you're actually giving the space for the people who report to you and work with you to have the permission, if you will, to engage in self care themselves. And I find that people who engage in self care, they get sleep, they work out, they do yoga, whatever they need to do, are much more efficient. In my opinion, you work as many hours as you need to get the job done, and you build your life around that. And I find that people that take that seriously, who are in my space and who are working with me, are just the best employees I can ever find.
So, side note, right? If I had asked you to put your month in percentages, right? What percentage is work versus self care versus yeah, just those two, work versus self care?
So let's start with the two businesses and break those out a bit. I spend 70% of my time on Gem Trainers, the nonprofit engagement, and about 30% of my time on real estate. And I own over 90 properties. So I just want people to hear like my ability to manage those two things. There must be systems in place. Otherwise, things would fall apart. And then when I think about self care, I'd say I work about 50 hours a week. I take huge blocks of time. I never schedule meetings that are an hour long. I do 45-minute meetings, and that way I have 15 minutes in between. I think you can accomplish tasks, many tasks, in 15 minutes if you stay really focused. And so instead of carrying the work to the end of the day and then staying up all night to get it done, I will finish a call in 45 minutes and use the next 15 minutes to either take a walk, get a cup of coffee, or do the work associated with the call I just got off of. So I hope what you're hearing is it's a very deliberate process for me to be able to carve out that time for self care. But beyond those 50 hours a week, as you see from my postings on social media, I spend a ton of time engaging in things that I really like to do. I mean, the idea of wealth is freedom, right? It's not just money. Money is important, but money is important because it buys you freedom. And if you're not taking advantage of that freedom, then what are you really
Yeah.
doing as an entrepreneur? And I'll say this, just so that this is not a focus group of one, the word people use to describe me most often recently is you seem really free.
Yeah, I want to kind of talk a little bit more about how you went from saying that sleep is for the weak and now people feel like you're a more free person, and you schedule a lot of self-care time, and in fact you want to surround yourself with people who are also engaging in self-care. Like, tell me about, as a leader, right? You have to be agile, you have to be able to shift focus, and you have to be okay with making change. So what was happening with you in between the time that you went from no sleep to team take a walk?
Yeah, I appreciate that. In fact, just today I was talking to my executive admin, and I realized that she has shifted in her availability. And I said, "Hey, I see that you're being much more disciplined about the times you're available, not just to me, but to people that we engage with, other stakeholders." And she started to defend that, and I said, "No, I'm actually really happy about that. Like, as long as I understand uh, you know, what your commitment is and what your commitment is to yourself, then I can work around that." And so again, I really value that. And just recently that example came up. What happened for me? I think that when you put yourself out there and you step into this role that most entrepreneurs think they need to step into, of the superhero, people treat you that way. And then when you're having life's challenges, someone dies, someone gets sick, you get sick, you have to have surgery, um, people are confused by it because you've shaped yourself
Yes.
into this superhuman being. And if you shaped yourself that way, then people treat you that way. I also find that people have less empathy and sympathy for you when things are not going well if you're the person that continues to show up like a machine. And so now when people describe you that way, I literally stop them. I pause them mid sentence and I say, I'm no different than you. Uh, I am not a superhero. I do not operate like a machine. The fact of the matter is that I just structure my life in a way that allows me to both be effective and sleep at night. And I love sleep. I don't know what it is. Maybe when I was younger, I could get away with it. But at this point in my life, I value my sleep. I go to sleep early. I wake up relatively early, but I'm still not one of those 3, 4 o'clock in the morning entrepreneurs.
So I'm gonna add to that question. Like, when that change happened, how did it affect your businesses?
It meant, first of all, being more courageous about investing for better outcomes. When I started as an entrepreneur in the private sector in particular, um, but also when I was in nonprofit, to be honest, you get resources, you sort of squirrel it away, and you're not as liberal in terms of spending those resources, and not realizing that the more you invest, the better return you may get on that investment when you make good decisions. And so I just started deciding, honestly, to just spend more money to get more talent, to get
Yeah.
better contracts, and contracts that pay me at the level that allow me to have the kind of flexibility that I need and that my team needs, if that makes sense. So it was actually waking up and saying to myself, if you're going to really change your own life and the way you move through the world, and you want this business to still be successful, you have to actually be comfortable with the idea that you need to make additional investments to realize your vision. You can't say you have a vision and then your practice looks different. Your rhetoric needs to match your activities and your decisions.
When I talk to people, I talk about the difference from going from an entrepreneur to a CEO, right? I think what you just identified is that difference, right? As an entrepreneur, you're still hustling. You're trying to do everything. You're trying to make things done and get everything done by yourself because you're trying to reduce your overhead and realize how much you can make, how much profitability your company does. When that mind shifts to be a CEO, you realize I can't do this all myself. I'm going to burn myself out. So to hire the team around you to think of, is these contracts that you're going after worth the amount of time? Me and you've been in the nonprofit sector together, and we've seen contracts come through. We're like, no, this contract is not worth it because it's too much work to get this little bit of funding. So I think that mind shift is a definitely part of that example.
You know, I used the word courage before on purpose. I don't want to oversell myself. Like it took a while for me to find the courage to make additional investments, but I went from, grossing 300,000 a year and having most of the work be on me to grossing 1.3 million dollars a year and having a team of 8. And that was the shift, to answer your question more squarely. So to make the additional investment, to have the courage to realize that you're going to get a good return, to be disciplined about which contracts you take on and which you don't. Like you just sort of touched on that. I went from realizing that every time I wake up and say, I can't take on another client, it's time to raise my prices. And people get scared to do that because they feel as if they're going to actually lose opportunity. That's not what's going to happen. There's other people that are going to pick up those lower paying opportunities. But as soon as you do that, what you actually do is you do less work for more resources and you buy yourself more time. And I'm constantly trying to buy myself more time.
That's something that a lot of entrepreneurs need to understand and learn from, right? It's not, I think in a past episode we spoke about hiring that number two to help you get more time to do the work that you need to do. I think this conversation about realizing the value in you and your company can get you more resources to hire more people to get more resources. So
You,
I think the idea that most small business owners have is that it'll cost me to do something. No, you're investing into your business, and it'll make
you
you
know,
much more profitable.
when I'm talking to when I'm talking to social entrepreneurs in the nonprofit space and they're just building out a nonprofit and they have a vision and they have their first or second or third grant and they're saying, who should I hire next? I say, well, how's the admin work being done? And do you have an admin assistant? They say no. I say, guess what? If you don't have an admin, you are the admin. So I tell people hire an
Facts.
admin so you can parse out the pieces of the work that you could be doing, but that you shouldn't be doing. That's always the first hire. The second hire for me, whether it's in the nonprofit space or the for-profit space, is who's feeding the baby, who's constantly thinking about bringing in new business. So if it's in nonprofit, it's the head of development, and if it's in for-profit, it's sales. Who's helping you to nail the next contract while you're actually doing the work and doing everything a CEO should be doing? Who's actually constantly thinking every day about what are we doing around revenue? How are we generating additional revenue? To me, those are two hires that speak to what you just said, which is I bring talent to the table, I bring vision to the table, I bring a bunch of things to the table. But there are two key pieces, in my opinion, that any entrepreneur, any CEO should start out thinking about so that they're actually carving out the pieces of the work that they absolutely should be doing versus the things they could be doing because they have the skills, but you can actually hire talent to be able to do it.
Takes one to know one, right? So when you see somebody, see another CEO, see someone talking, see someone doing their job, what about them would you say, okay, yeah, he's a dynamic leader? What would make you actually see that in someone else as they're doing their work?
I am big on accountability, um, responsibility. Like, I first of all look for a CEO that takes ownership over the outcomes they're producing. Whether you fail or whether you succeed, being able to say, I contributed to that and it didn't go the way I wanted it to go, is really important to me. But also owning your greatness when things go well. I like people who actually can own their greatness and say, we knocked that out the park. I think that's important. I think we're often taught to shrink ourselves. And I actually think it's important for people to be able to own their greatness and to give permission to their team to do the same. But also, again, when things go wrong, to be able to own the challenges. So that's one of the first things I look for. Second thing I look for is a problem solver, someone who sees a challenge and is already thinking about a solution, and not someone. If you're paving a road at a university, you come in and you look first and you see where people are walking, and then you pave that path. So I'm always looking for someone that's already thinking not just about solutions, but solutions that match which with the direction the organization wants to go, with the mission, with the goal, with the direction. So that sort of combination of problem solver but pragmatism, those are the things I look for in partnerships. I mean, it's the reason I've worked with Primus so many years with so many clients, and I feel so comfortable recommending you and your team to clients because my clients start out with significant challenges that many nonprofit CEOs actually shouldn't have to get around the learning curve around, right? They should know enough to look at a dashboard and understand what's going on. But it's another example of bringing in talent. And I find that you and your team tend to come in, take a look at the challenges, have solutions in place, and even sometimes shape solutions to their very specific needs. Because I've seen you work with small, sort of rinky-dink startups, if you will, to organizations that have been around for a couple of decades with multi-million dollar budgets.
Glenn has spent some time discussing some of the tools and tactics that he uses to kind of maximize his entrepreneurial output. But Janae, we haven't really heard from you because you work a lot of hours too. So I think it would be really insightful to hear about, some of the things. What's the difference between the Janae 20 years ago to now, and what are some of those systems that you've put in place for your own organization?
No, I appreciate that. No, I tell you, I love talking to Glenn. So when even this podcast, like just hearing him give insights on these things helps me a lot. I think I am building myself to where Glenn is, right? I am still the 4 o'clock in the morning getting stuff done. But what I've learned, especially during COVID, as I'm working from home, is instead of me working from 4 till 9 o'clock at night, I work from 4 till about 5 or 6. Then I get my kids ready for school. I walk them to school. I hang out with them. Make them breakfast. I go back to work at 9, right? And like Glenn, but I'm going to steal something from you now because now I usually do the hour meeting, then take a 5-10 minute break and come back. My meeting's about to go to 45 minutes for everybody, so that's gonna be something that's happening real quickly. But I like that idea of like shorten the meetings because after that meeting, an hour meeting is taxing, right? A lot of information coming out. You're really putting your all into a client at one time, but you need to make those breaks, right? You need to take those time periods away from your desk, away from your computer, especially in this day and age. My entire office was downtown Brooklyn. Now it's in my home. That means at the beginning of COVID, I pretty much worked 20 hours a day because I go down the stairs and I work. I pass my office, I work. Now that I'm starting to get used to it a little bit more, learning to make those breaks in your day, learning to take those walks around the block, learn to just walk away from the screen, it helps, right? I told Glenn last year, I actually went out and bought a motorcycle because I learned something about myself. But that was like that 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 transition from your office to your home that you take every day, right? That commute is usually a lot of people's time to just debrief, reflect, listen to music, and chill. When you're working from home, you don't have that. So at 4:30, 5 o'clock, I'm on my bike, even if I'm just going around the corner, because I need to a way to get out and really release some of those activities. So I think all those things that we're talking about is about knowing how to have wellness for yourself, how to take mental breaks from work. Because like every entrepreneur, I'm sure there's time Glenn's trying to like shut your brain off because it won't stop going. And these are ways to do that. I think it's a very helpful and needed part of being a leader. It's like you have to take those breaks. I mean, the meditations that you do, the exercise. Glenn works out way more than me. I'm trying to catch up, but all those are all part of just trying to get yourself to a point where you're not the only in your business, and you have time and patience for yourself and for your family, and time to just relax and deep dive. I'll say this one joke. Last year, I took a picture of myself on a beach, and the first person to comment on that picture online was Glenn. Really? A button-down shirt on the beach? It's that kind of mentality. At least I was relaxing a little bit.
I've known Janae actually long enough to see the evolution from my vantage point. And Janae, I remember when we worked together for an employer, and I remember how you moved through the hallways. It was almost like you were on a track. Like you would just boom, 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 get to where you got to go. I actually think I have seen you take moments now to take a deep breath. I actually haven't even seen you with a jacket on in years. So even that's pretty different.
Very true.
So I wanted to shift, kind of make a shift in the conversation a little bit because a lot of the work that I have at least read that you do, Glenn, is about helping to cultivate dynamic leadership. And within the conversation, you talked about some of the qualities that you possess as a dynamic leader. Now, if when it comes to leadership, a lot of times, especially in society, we hear that kind of like leadership is just a thing. Either you are or you aren't. Talk a little bit about that idea. Is leadership something that can be cultivated?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I did touch on leadership earlier because I spend a lot of my time thinking about leadership. My team, my team is really talented because there are three principles I tend to look for. when I think about leadership with people I'm hiring. And then there's a certain sort of set of skills I also look for that are fundamental for me. Let's talk about the skills first, just to be brief. I look for people who have an engine, so people who are motivated to get the work done. I look for people who own the outcome, meaning we have a conversation, we agree on what the outcome is you're trying to produce. You don't have to do it yourself, but you have to at least be the person that says, this is the outcome we agreed upon, and I need to own that outcome. And then someone who's willing to learn, someone who's open to learning. I've never taken on a new job where I knew 100% of what I needed to do. I've had many, many jobs, particularly in the nonprofit sector. Every time I stepped into them, I was about 60% of the way to the finish line in trying to figure out the job. So those are some fundamental things I look for when I'm doing interviews, either for myself or when I'm doing them for my clients. But in terms of leadership principles, I mentioned one earlier, I'll mention it again and then move on to the next two. I look for people that take responsibility for the outcomes that they're producing. Like, you cannot control other people's behavior, other people's decision making, how they show up in the world. Good luck with that. What you can control is what you're contributing to the situation. And it also is a very empowering place to be as a leader, to ask yourself, what am I contributing to the outcomes that I'm producing here in this situation? It's a very empowering place to be. So taking responsibility for the outcomes you're producing. The second one is being self-reflective and soliciting feedback as a way to grow your leadership. Someone who asks questions: how am I doing? What could I have done differently? How did that event go? And then taking that feedback and not responding to it in the moment. I find that people immediately try to explain themselves, which sends the message to the person who you just invited to give you feedback that you actually don't want that feedback. And so soliciting feedback in a way that allows you to hear it, take it with you, process it. I'm not suggesting you solicit feedback from everyone. You find people who you think are invested in your leadership and you ask them for feedback, and then you take it and you say, thank you. Is there anything else? And then the third one is creating collective leadership. I hire people who are interested in building the leadership of the person next to them. Like, people step up into leadership roles, whether it's a CEO, nonprofit leader, and so on, and they try to emulate some other leader they see that they appreciate. And it's really difficult to figure out what good leaders are doing from far away because they do it so well. What most good leaders are doing are investing in the leadership of other people. And if you spend the majority of your time doing that, you will emerge as an amazing leader. And people who worry about who's going to get the credit, I have never seen a person hire 5, 10, 15 talented people. They kick butt and take names, and the person who hired them not get the credit ultimately. That's just how the world works. So people have to sort of let go of the ego piece, let go of the, self-esteem piece, or whatever it is that's in the way of letting them give credit to other people and give people the space to invest in each other.
No, I agree. I think the reality that there are people who come in with certain skills, right? I think leadership. I'm one of those, right? I don't believe that I was born a leader. I think the people who are around me, who gave me a lot of opportunities and invested in my development, helped me to get where I am. So I think the idea that you hire those that have the skills to get almost there, and you can help them, really mentor them and get them to the rest of the way, is an important aspect of really developing a team of leaders, right? Because as a CEO, as a leader of an organization, you have to be able to walk away from certain parts of your company, let other people do it. And those people have to
Yeah,
be able to lead in those aspects. So
yeah.
being able to do that, I think, is a very important part of that.
I think we're finally going to disagree on something. Here's what we're going to disagree on. I actually think everyone is born a leader, and then it's beaten out of us along the way. And then some people find their way back to leadership. If you think of children, they show up in a room, they make themselves known, they ask for what they want, they're very direct. Like, all of the things it actually takes to be a good CEO. I mean, as long as you don't engage in micromanaging. Sometimes people confuse being a very direct person with micromanaging, asking for what you want with micromanaging, holding people accountable with micromanaging. There's a distinction between those two things. But I actually think, again, society actually beats the leadership out of most of us. And if you can help people find their way back to that leadership, when someone's on my team and they come to me and say, hey, Glenn, we weren't able to finish this task because Michael didn't do his part. And I say to them, well, how did you engage Michael to try to get him to do his part? I sent him an email. Okay, when that didn't work, what did you do? I sent another email. When that didn't work, what did you do? I sent another email. Okay, well, let's have a conversation. Like, what could you have done differently? What are different steps you could have taken to get the outcome that you were looking for? And people sometimes say to me, well, that doesn't feel good. That feels like I'm being heavy handed. There's no other way to lead except to pick up the phone and be really clear with people, or to send an email that's extremely clear. Because then, instead of saying, I need this document as soon as possible, you say, I need this document Thursday by 5 o'clock. Some people think that's micromanaging. The problem with that is that if he doesn't deliver it, now when you get on the phone and say, I needed it as soon as possible, he said, oh, yeah, as soon as possible for me is next Wednesday. As opposed to, I asked you to get that to me Thursday by 5. You could have said to me you weren't going to be able to do that. And those are some of the things I do to try to help people get back to the leader that I think is really inherent in who they are.
Glenn, you talked about a few things earlier that I really want to come back to, because I think this is a really, really great way to end this conversation. You both were talking about making the leap from being a solopreneur to being a CEO, right? Which requires more leadership, but it also requires you to hire people and to do things differently. And so we started with hiring admin. Then the second part was who's feeding the baby. Is there a third, fourth, and fifth step?
Yeah, I guess the next step for me is, I feel as if successful managers, some people are like, I manage 10 people. I'm like, really? I'm sorry for you. Like, you shouldn't be managing 10 people. I feel like for a person to be really effective, you're managing maybe 3 people, maybe 4 if you're an excellent manager and you have a lot of resources. But that means that the people that you're now managing have to turn around and manage other people. So that's the next thing I'm looking for is, am I building an hierarchical structure where I am not working too deeply? Because if you think of the clown in the circus with 10 pins up in the air, as soon as he or she pays too much attention to one pin, all the rest of the pins come crashing down. And so as a manager, as a leader, as a CEO, I am looking for people beneath me, next to me, who can be CEOs of their own shop, who can actually take the skill sets that I'm using to engage them and to invest in them and do the same thing for others. So I'd say that that's probably the third thing I'm looking for. And then I guess fourth and fifth and sixth and seventh is, I always hire people knowing that they're probably not going to be with me forever, and that that's a win. Like, I am always talking to people as if they are the leaders that they are. That tends to translate into people showing up as leaders. If you speak to the leader, people show up as a leader. If you speak to the idiot, they show up as an idiot. If you speak to the leader, they show up as a leader. And the more they show up as a leader, the more they become an opportunity for some other CEO, or the more they create opportunities for themselves. And so when someone comes to me, I just had a guy working for me. He got his law degree. He has a bunch of clients. He opened his own nonprofit. He's doing consulting. And, we had to go from 3 contracts slowly down to 0. And did that create a gap for me? Yes. But I'm also always thinking about, who am I bringing along? Who's the emerging leader? But I also saw a win. Like, when I met him, he didn't know how to work as a consultant, didn't have his law license. I created an opportunity for him, but also he was an opportunity for me. And now he's on his way. I check that off as a win. That's a huge win. And endings create room for new beginnings. So as this leader goes off and does what he's going to do, some emerging leaders coming along that I get to invest in.
This show is brought to you by Julo.shop. Experience more than just shopping at Julo.shop. It's a celebration of amazing products from Black-owned brands. Our product partners are like you and me. They had a vision, and now they're a part of the Julo family. We promise to bring you quality, convenience, and the selection that you deserve. Discover, experience, and enjoy something new at Julo.shop today. Visit www.julo.shop.
All right, let's get right into the CEO quick deep dive. So Glenn, we have about 5 questions we want to ask you today, just to learn more about GEM Trainers and the work that you do. So the first one is, what challenges were you observing within the nonprofit sector when GEM Trainers was established? And how do GEM Trainers address those challenges and provide support?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So, I myself was a practitioner, if you will, in the nonprofit space. So, I know the space intimately. I've worked for other nonprofits. I've learned what worked there and what didn't work. And then I built a nonprofit from scratch, from a concept paper into an organization with over 40 people on staff, multiple offices, and so on. And what I realized is every minute I spent trying to figure out the back office work of building a nonprofit is a minute I wasn't spending moving the vision forward. And CEOs obviously have to be responsible, fiduciary responsibility, and so on, HR responsibility, and those sort of things. But I quickly realized that some of the curbs that I spent a lot of painful moments and a lot of time trying to get around, I just didn't need to. And I decided that there's an opportunity for me to create a nonprofit that picks up some of the difficult, particularly fundraising related work for people who either don't have the skills, don't have the expertise, don't have the experience, don't have the relationship, don't have the time. And we could fill that gap long enough for them to figure out how to build the infrastructure to do it, how to build a strategy to do it, and how to build the staffing to be able to do it. And so I find joy in working with clients long enough to actually have them feel comfortable doing it themselves, or having the nature of my relationship to the organization evolve over time because they've become really good at the value add that we brought to the table. So that was one piece, and then the other piece is when it comes to philanthropy and nonprofits, anyone who knows anything about it knows that it's not a very equitable space. And I was exposed to fundraising by mostly white leaders in the space who demystified it for me in a way that most leaders of color don't get an opportunity to see and understand. And I met a lot of leaders of color in particular that thought if I do good work, someone's going to fund me. And I met a lot of white leaders who thought if I convince people I'm going to do good work, they'll fund me. And so I help Black leaders, brown leaders in particular, to sell themselves and to sell their vision, because that's how philanthropy works. For better or for worse, it's about the leader, their vision, and the mission of the organization, not exactly about the work that they're actually doing, for better or for worse.
Can you provide some insights into the key strategies or best practices that Gem Trainers recommends for nonprofits to build sustainable fundraising and development programs?
You want me to give my strategies away? Let me let me think about which ones I'm willing to share, which ones are proprietary. Um, let me let me start by saying brand matters. When I started talking about brand in the nonprofit space, people looked at me like I had two heads. But many years ago, as a young man, I worked in corporate America. I worked in the private sector, and I realized the value of brand, like what it means for people to be able to see a brand and immediately make an association with that brand without you saying a word. And so I tell my clients before I even work with them, I won't even sign a contract unless they actually work on their assets that tell a story about what they're trying to build, and then associate that very closely with the brand and commit to be super disciplined about that brand. So what does that mean for people who don't understand brand? Anything from the color of your logo, how your logo is shown publicly, being super disciplined about it, looking the same every single time, using messages that are reachable, that are not jargony, trying to inspire people to invest in you, recognizing that funders give away money, it's what they do. And you should feel comfortable giving them something amazing to invest in. So, building the confidence of leaders is really important. And then helping leaders understand that if you're starting from zero and you're trying to sell people an idea and it's not their idea, it's yours, so they haven't thought about it anywhere near as much as you have, then you need to take them on a journey. And you do that with two things: you do that with narrative and you do that with numbers. And so build a budget that tells a story about what you would do if you had $2 million. Write a narrative that talks about what the work would look like if you had $2 million. Because if you can't take people 1 to 3 years in the future and you're just sitting there with the concept paper in your hand asking for $500,000, it's difficult for people to go on that journey with you. People need to know where they're going. It's the same way you plan a trip and you say, I need to know what my logistics are. I need a travel memo. I need to understand where I'm going. Same thing in the nonprofit sector. You have to take people on that journey, even if right now it's just conceptual.
What sets Gem Trainers apart from other fundraising organizations?
We don't produce products that sit on a shelf. So we're not the type of organization that'll come in and do a deep dive and write some 80-page, strategic planning document that is either too much firepower for a small nonprofit or just way too jargony or doesn't fit the resources of the organization. We actually become part of the leadership team of the organization. People receive us and experience us as on their team. I charge nonprofits retainers, and so that means that sometimes I am over servicing a contract, sometimes I might be under servicing a contract, but over time it balances itself out. But more importantly, they receive us as someone who's on the team because whenever they need to engage us, they can. And that's really important for nonprofits. I hate consultants. I ran an organization with a $7 million budget. I found that consultants can be sometimes only as valuable as your ability to remember that they even exist and your ability to check in and engage them. And that's not to knock consultants. I get it. I know the nature of the business. You have to have more and more business to make it work. At the same time, I was just talking to a client today. I've had 4 contracts with this client, 4 different iterations of work with them, anywhere between $12,000 a month and $2,500 a month. We're going now from about $7,000 a month back down to about $3,500 a month. Why? Because that client now sees us as part of their team. So they don't want to totally let go. Even though the work doesn't look the same, they want to keep me and at least one other person close to their leadership team until they figure out what the next more robust iteration of our relationship looks like. That's one of my strategies. And it sounds painful for some people because they'd rather charge by the hour. I find when you charge by the hour, you get into a transactional relationship. And I didn't come this far and build a business to be in a transactional relationship with my clients.
So, we've talked for a while, and we know you have Gem Trainers and we have Gem Real Estate and maybe a whole bunch of other businesses that we don't know about yet. So, can you briefly talk about the idea behind Gem Real Estate and how you would effectively manage multiple businesses?
Gem Real Estate was about legacy, it was about building wealth, and it was about freedom. And legacy, because I quickly realized that no matter how people make money in this country, that money often at least ends up in real estate if it didn't start there. And that's a message to people about the value of real estate investment and the type of long-term equity that you can build, but also the tremendous amount of tax benefits associated with running a real estate business. I have a consultancy that grosses over $1 million a year. I need to figure out how to write off much of that income. Real estate helps me do that. So even if I'm taking losses in real estate, there's some significant tax benefits to it. Second of all, it's a very decentralized business. If I find a real estate agent that I work with and a year later we don't really jive the way we did before, I find another one. If I find a contractor and things are not working out, I find another contractor. No one takes it personal. It's the nature of the business. Like there's a million contractors, a million real estate agents, a million inspectors, a million lawyers. And essentially I get to pick and choose the team I want to work with. And over time, given the evolution of my own business, I mean, when I had 6 houses, I wanted a different real estate agent than when I have 50 houses. And that's just, why would I still work with the person who's better at maybe single family homes with an investor that has 6 and not shift to someone who actually works with investors that are more sophisticated, maybe doing portfolio loans, buying 30 houses at a time, 20 houses at a time. So I loved that sort of decentralized approach and the ability to put together a team every time you're working on a different deal. That was very valuable. And then I think I said wealth. I have beautiful children. They're in some of the best schools this country has to offer. I want them to have a head start in a way that I didn't. I grew up in poverty. I grew up on Section 8. I grew up on public assistance. That was a really difficult battle. I am a phoenix if you've ever met one. Like I've come back from zero a number of times, some of which you're very aware of. And I don't want my children's life to be that difficult. We'll find other ways to make it difficult so they could build resiliency and character, but not the kind of butt kicking that I've taken throughout life. Like read a book. You don't want to go through what I went through. And part of the ability to do that is when they get to a certain age to be able to have tax sheltered wealth that allows them to start from a different starting point, if you will.
So, what is next for Glenn E. Martin?
Man, I'm bored already, bro. I can't even lie. Like I am. I've I built a real estate business in 4 years, bought 90 houses, and I never, I have this. I've lived my life a number of times already, and every 4.5 to 5 years, I get this itch. And the itch is usually around, damn, you've gotten good at what you do it well, but the next day you're just doing more of the same. And even if it's more money, even if it's more staff, even if it's more success, more accolades, whatever, that's not enough for me. I need a challenge. I need to be challenged. It's the way my brain works. It's the way I'm built. I'm a fighter. I'm an advocate. And I always need to feel like I'm pushing against something. If I I wish I had the answer to this question. Let me tell you. I recently hung out with a gentleman who is 84 years old, and he's been an ambassador and he has been a key advisor to a number of presidents. And we were just having a casual conversation about very similar to the question you just asked me. And I was saying the same thing, that I'm really challenged by the fact that for the first time in my life, I don't know what's on the horizon. Like I usually need to know what's on the horizon and where I'm going. And some people might say, Glenn, you have enough on your plate. But I always need to know what's coming up next. And for the first time, I don't. Like I don't know what the next significant challenge is. And and he just looked right at me in his with his 84-year-old eyes and said, "You need to embrace that, young man." He said, "Not many leaders get a chance in life to slow down and assess and ask themselves why they're doing what they're doing and really create that star on the hill, if you will, that you can move toward." And so right now, I'm actually in that moment. And I'm actually trying to live with that. Like I've moved on from the type A personality, but there's residue of that is in the way of me embracing this moment. But that was a really powerful statement from a person who could have just as easily gave me some transactional advice about what I should be doing next, and instead said to me, "Take a deep breath, young man. You'll figure that out. It'll come to you. Listen to your heart." And honestly, that's always worked for me. And I'm just getting very okay with not knowing what's next. I think that actually, um, you know, let me say something I didn't say earlier. The reason I don't worry about what's next, and I know when it comes, I'll be able to handle it, is because being a CEO is so much more about managing people and finding talent than it is about the content of the work. Like people say, how did you build a real estate business so fast? You must know a ton about real estate. Not true. I know a ton about hiring smart people. I surrounded myself with people who know way more about real estate than I ever will. So whatever the next thing is on the horizon, as a circuitous way to answer your question, I know I already have the skill sets in place as a leader, as a CEO, to be able to figure out how to find the right talent to move me toward that. And then lastly, I've also learned to, like I said earlier, um, take responsibility for the places where I have failed and figure out, like, I learned so much more in the valley than I do on the mountain. Like those failures, those dark places, those places where the amount of people around you actually shrinks considerably because you're no longer shining on top of the mountain. Those are the best opportunities to dig in and say, what are the lessons learned and how do I carry those lessons into the next opportunity?
So Glenn, thank you. We really appreciate the information, the advice, the wealth of knowledge you brought to the show today. And we look forward to talking to you again soon.
We sincerely appreciate you being a part of Right on the Money. Among the multitude of podcasts available, we're truly honored that you've chosen to listen to ours. If you or someone you know would bring valuable insights as a guest on our show, we invite you to access the guest request form linked in our show notes. We're always excited to connect with remarkable individuals. Remember, you have the power to share the gift of high-level business advice with the CEOs in your life. By spreading the word about our podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, you help us reach a broader audience and create a more significant impact. Stay inspired, keep growing, and join us again next time for more insightful discussions.